All right, guys, welcome back to Prepper Talk Radio for the ready-minded. And as usual, Scott, Shane, and Paris are here in the house. Actually, I shouldn't say in the house, not even in our homes. I'm actually at Basil and Rose. And for those of you who haven't noticed, if you're listening, you haven't seen her. But if you're watching, I've got Buena sitting right next to me, who is the owner of Basil and Rose. We're excited to have her here.
Well, great. Thanks. It's good to be back.
And this episode is going to be all about gardening. But before we jump into that, I want to remind you guys there's a 20% off deal going on at Fortress Clothing. Click the link on our homepage, preppertalkradio.com, and use the coupon code PREPPER. That'll get you 20% off. That is only good till the end of May. As soon as June 2nd hits, well, I guess they're going to let us do it June 1st. June 2nd, say goodbye to that deal. But as soon as you're done with that, I want you to grab your pen and paper. Well, press pause, but grab your pen and paper because you're going to want to take notes, because this is going to be maybe life-changing. I don't want to put it up too high, but every time I've talked to Buena, I've gotten better understanding of how to garden. And where I live, it's weird compared to where I grew up. So she's actually my local neighborhood go-to for gardening. I bought tons of seeds here. I bought some walking onions here. And I even got my Vermiculite here. So
nice.
I know. Like,
could I order that by the ton, Buena, that Vermiculite?
No, the 4 cubic foot bag is the largest I know of.
4 cubic foot bag.
I got my pad of paper ready to go. So
well, Buena, there's just a few things I want to know, but go ahead, Scott. I won't interrupt you.
No, go ahead. I was just going to jump into the conversation. Shane's already ready to go.
Yeah, I just want to know a few things. The usual questions I have: the who, what, when, where, why, how. That's all I want to know. That's just
yeah, just a little bit of things.
Just a little bit, just a few things.
Let's jump into your background. So you're the owner of Basil and Rose.
Yes.
You speak at like every preparedness event I've seen. Like, give us your background. How'd you get into this? Why is this important to you? And just kind of give us a whole view of who you are.
Well, I have a degree in horticulture from Utah State University. My parents, I don't know if I'd call them preppers, but they always had food storage. We always had a garden. My dad was a poultry science professor. We always had chickens. So it was great growing up that way on, a decent sized piece of land. That was a great experience. And so I've expanded on that preparedness thing. I try to store lots of different ways to cook, different ways to light, all that, plus toilet paper, soap, all of that. And I think it's so important for people to grow their own food. I started as a landscape designer and then realized I like teaching people how to garden. So
and you're really good at it.
Thank you.
And she's built some cool tools to help you understand. And one of my favorite tools that she's built is actually going to be on our next episode with her, that goes into like wild edibles. But her business card actually tells me what I should plant when here. And it's like, every time I have a question, she's like, did you read my card? And I'm like, I need to go back and read the card. I need to memorize the card because it's got what works well in which seasons, when you can plant them. And it's helping me a ton because I'm lost.
Well, and the card isn't just for people here. There's a place at the top where you put in your last average frost date. So somebody somewhere else could use it. And then it tells them how far ahead of that date you can plant certain things. Because some people here think that they can't plant anything till after Mother's Day, which is the last average frost date. And you could have started planting things in March. So anyway, it can apply to people in various locations. They just fill in that information, tells them when to plant.
Can they get a copy of that on your website? Not yet.
Not yet. I could certainly post a picture of it. I've posted a picture of it on Facebook before, but I could do that.
Where can they find you on Facebook?
So it's not Basil and Rose because that was taken. But from basilandrose.com, they can go to the link to my Facebook and my Instagram, YouTube, all of that. My other website is gardeninspire.com. So that one wasn't taken. So it's Garden Inspire on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. So
we knew Buena before she started Basil and Rose, and
Right.
and she had Garden Inspire and her books and all that good stuff.
But I've had this business plan for over 25 years before I opened the store. So it's
Wow.
been exciting to
Awesome.
do it.
And I'm a terrible friend because you've had the store open for
3 years.
3 years and it's literally like less than 7 minutes from my house. And I drive past it all the time and like I see it. And I know Buena owns Basil and Rose. And I drive past Basil and Rose. I'm like, I wonder what that place is. Like disconnected brain. So like if you're listening and you have that issue, please comment on our Facebook page to let me know that I'm not crazy. But if I am crazy, you can comment that as well, Prepper Talk Radio. But gardening is like, I grew up gardening, but I'm not good at it. Like my dad's always had a garden. My mom's always been in gardening. My grandparents on both sides always had gardens. One of them was like big into tilling. The other one would just pile everything up. And I don't think I ever saw him till. And I know that's something Shane's all about, like tilling versus no till. Like, is there one way that's better than the other? Like, what are your recommendations?
Never tilled in my life.
Okay.
My dad grew up on a farm, loved driving a tractor. He always tilled the garden. For one thing, I never had a tiller, and I used to do some digging. And I don't know at what point I found out that that's not a good thing. So I only dig if I'm planting a plant. So tilling actually is very damaging to the soil. It kills microorganisms in the soil, which those are so important. So they found that microorganisms in the soil become like, some of them become like an extension of plant roots. So the plant can get water outside the root zone. They also can help plants with pest and disease control. And so there's the earthworms and wonderful things that we can see. And then there's all the things we can't see. So that's one thing that tilling is a problem with. And then the other thing, another thing is when you're tilling, you're bringing weed seeds to the surface, and a lot of weed seeds won't germinate unless they get light. So they could have been buried for decades, and then you bring them to the surface and boom, there you got weeds. And bindweed, some people call it morning glory. It's not morning glory. Bindweed, if you chop it up, you just got more bindweed. Same thing with most grasses. So you till bindweed in grass, you just spread it. And then another problem with tilling is if you till to the same depth over and over, like 6 inches, you've just created what's called a hard pan, and roots and water have trouble penetrating through that.
So Buena, the last time we were talking, I've got some land and it's all sod. I mean, the sod is 6 to 8 inches thick. It's brutal because it's been grazing land for 100 years, right? So my first instinct was to get a tiller, and I got a big one, and to till under this grass, because it's also a lot of horse manure. It's going to be good ground. I think it's going to be really good soil, but I'm trying to figure out how to get through this grass to plant a traditional row crop, right? What is your take on that?
So I actually haven't helped anybody that has a lot of land, because normally I just tell people cover it up. Cover it up with several inches of compost. It'll just decompose and it will add organic matter to your soil, which is great, especially here in Utah where we don't naturally have much organic matter. I know there's people that have farms that do no-till.
So I guess the theory with no-till, not their theory, the practice with no-till is every year you're adding layer. You're adding a layer every year. You're adding that compost to soil, whatever. So you don't need to get down into the soil, into the topsoil, but you're adding layers. I'm just, I guess my question is how does that work with this sod? And I don't have a lot of land, but I'm trying to do a, say, 50 by 15 high tunnel is what I'm trying to prepare my soil for, this high tunnel. And I'm going to do planter beds in my greenhouse when I get that up. But I'm struggling with this because, yes, I'm finding roots, I'm finding lots of grass, old weed stuff. I'm bringing the weed stuff up. I'm just trying to get it ready. It may take me a couple of years from what I've heard from other people. So I'm just trying to figure out the best way to go about preparing this soil to plant in.
Well, one thing I've done at several different houses, and I've advised other people to do, is mow it really short as you can, then cover it up with 4 or 5 inches of compost. Or put some cardboard down and put compost on top of it. Most of the time I've just done straight compost with no cardboard. And all that stuff down there decomposes. It encourages earthworms and other creatures to go in there and help mix it up for you, which is a much better thing with them doing it than you doing it, and a lot less work.
Yeah, that was a lot of tough work, even with my tiller. So I guess what I'm going to try next is I'm going to take a smaller section, like I say, cut it really short and just start to cover it. I'll try that next.
Now,
Yep.
Buena,
and
would
that should
you
work great.
Buena, would you advise that somebody kind of put, they have these grow boxes that you can put in your yard. Those grow boxes are what help to contain the compost so that it's not spilling all over the place, or it's only where you want it. So would it be a good idea to kind of maybe put a border of a board or so around where you want to have that compost and then fill it in, leave it without a floor, and just let the ground be the floor and then fill that in like that? Is that what you recommend? Or
Well, I do raised bed gardening also, specifically square foot gardening. But what I'm talking about here, I wouldn't put a border around it. The only border I would do is if there's a place you want to keep lawn, then you
Okay.
need to make sure you have something there to prevent the lawn from going into where you don't want lawn, which doesn't mean a mow strip, that won't do any good, but some kind of edging that goes about 5 inches deep and about an inch above the ground, just to help. Just a continual piece. You can get it in plastic, metal, or whatever. Or some people actually dig a little trench and then they just go and clear the trench over and over. They just check it all the time to make sure grass doesn't jump that trench.
Because I know there's a lot of people that have a philosophy of grass area doesn't do much. And so get rid of the grass and grow food. And so the best way to get rid of the grass, so to speak, and grow food would be something like we were talking about, where you're creating these, compost piles and bordering them off and making it more productive of a yard than just grass.
But it's finished compost in most cases instead of a compost pile where you're making compost.
Oh, good idea.
So when it comes to making compost, so do you recommend we have should we buy those bins and throw everything into the compost type bin, the plastic ones that you have to roll, or should we just do a pile and mix stuff in? Do we need to add anything to it? What do you recommend?
So I teach a whole 1-hour class just on composting, but,
Wow.
and I teach lots of different ways, and there's different ways to do it. If you have one of the tumbler types, you need some other way to compost, because you can't keep adding to it and expect it to be finished. Plus you can't fill it more than about half full. Just like if you've ever known anybody that crammed too many clothes in the dryer, they don't get dry.
Good point.
But there's other ways to compost. So another thing you could do is when you're covering up sod or something like that, mow it really short and there's a book that came out called Lasagna Gardening, but it's actually sheet composting is the same basic idea. You put layers of different things and you don't have to duplicate layers like if you were actually making a lasagna, but you can put a layer of leaves, you can put a layer of vegetable peelings, you can put some cardboard or whatever, and you put compost over the top, finished compost over the top of the whole thing. And then the compost is decomposing. So it is kind of like a compost pile.
Can I put grass clippings in there, or is
Grass
that a no-no?
clippings are best left on your lawn
Okay.
because they're improving your lawn. Plus, if you don't tend your lawn organically, you just added that stuff, which you should
Didn't think
tend
of
your
that.
lawn organically if you have a lawn.
So leave the grass clippings on your lawn if you want to have a greener
Yes.
lawn. Don't
Yes.
put them in the trash.
Nope. Don't just
Huh.
leave them right on the lawn. They help the lawn. They don't contribute to thatch. Plus, it's a lot less work to just leave them on the lawn.
Yeah.
It
for
doesn't
sure.
look as nice, which I think is what most people are concerned about, right?
But if you have little piles of grass all over after mowing, usually it either was damp when you mowed or you waited too long to mow.
It was too long.
Waiting too long is my problem.
Yes. I
So
would do that
we've
too.
learned tonight that I leave too much in the dryer. I put too much in the dryer and I wait too long to mow. And I'm also not a green thumb, but I'm working on that. So some people, I did boxes this year because I've got a greenhouse, a 12 by 20 greenhouse, and I wanted to keep things separated. So I did raised boxes inside that, and everything I keep coming down here and I walk in and Buena's like, it's not Thursday. We're doing our show on Thursday. And I'm like, I know, I need this, or what do I do for this? And it's fantastic. So I've learned, like, I don't need to till. I don't need to worry about that anymore. I got vermiculite, I've got the peat moss, and then I got the compost. And now I'm mixing that all up tomorrow, and then I'll start putting that in all the beds. And I wouldn't have known to do that because I'm not a good gardener, right? And you don't have to be. But Buena is like, do this, now do this, now do this, now do this.
So
don't
Buena,
plant that yet because it hasn't gotten past our last frost date. So thank you.
Buena, tell us what the vermiculite and peat moss and what Scott's talking about, what that's all for.
So when you have a raised bed, it's essentially like a big pot. So you don't want to use garden soil or topsoil. And a lot of stuff around here isn't really topsoil anyway. It's out of the bottom of a hole. So it may not even be good. But if you want it to drain well, but also balance that with holding water like it should, you're essentially making a potting soil. And sometimes I use this mix to make my own potting soil. So vermiculite is a volcanic product that they put in an oven and it heats, it pops. It has crevices in it that hold in water and nutrients and release them. And then instead of peat moss, you can use core, which is the hairy stuff on the outside of a coconut. They sell that for the same purpose. And so the vermiculite and the core or peat moss help with the water holding and water drainage. And then the compost has nutrients in it and microorganisms in it. So after you've mixed all that together for a pot or raised bed or whatever, the only thing you ever need to add again is compost.
Would that be the same mix?
Compost every time before you plant.
Would that be the same mix if you were going to be trying to put it on replace your yard with garden?
No, I would just use compost.
Just compost. Okay, cool. So the vermiculite, the peat moss, and the core for when you're doing raised beds, more for when you're doing raised beds.
Or a pot.
Or a pot. Got it.
And you don't need peat moss and core. You would need one or the other.
One or the other. Got it.
So it's compost, vermiculite, and either core or peat moss. If you're using peat moss, they come in a compressed bale. And you want to fluff them up or you'll end up with twice as much peat moss as you should have.
So you need to fluff your peat moss.
Yes. But on the ground, just compost.
Now, are there certain, like as I'm planting, are there certain things that I should be planting together and other things I should not plant near each other at all? Are there any recommendations along those lines?
So there's a lot of books and other information about companion planting. And there's also information about planting by the phases of the moon. There's all kinds of things that could make gardening really complicated. And you can do some of those things if you want to, but the most important thing is plant stuff in the conditions it likes. So don't plant basil in the shade. Don't plant tomatoes in the shade. And cilantro does better in shade. So whether it's sunny or shady, that kind of stuff is more important. And then lavender and sage don't like to stay damp. So if it's an area where it's the soil staying damper, don't put them there.
Okay. That's
a
good.
Question for you about compost, Buena. I know we could take an hour on this, but what shouldn't I compost? Try and keep the question simple.
Okay. So nothing from dogs, cats, no meat, bones, dairy, very little, if any, grains, pasta, bread, those kinds of things. The things you should not compost like that can cause disease problems as far as the animal poop, and also can attract more pest problems like rodents and things like that, and tend to be stinky before they decompose. Now, there are people that do huge composting facilities and they can compost those kinds of things, but just for a homeowner, it's not good to add those things to your pile.
I've heard that you can compost anything that was previously alive. Is that something that you would agree on? If it was alive, compost, like cardboard came from trees, right? Simple example.
So you could, that doesn't mean you should. So you put bindweed or grass roots in your compost pile, again, you're probably going to have more of it. Now, if your compost pile gets hot enough so it kills whatever like that, then that may not be a problem. But again, as a homeowner, that's not something I wouldn't put like dandelion seeds in there or something like that.
So when we're out in the country and you see these huge piles wrapped in plastic, I assume that's because they're trying to keep the heat in for that compost to do its job.
Probably.
Okay.
And sometimes it's a big tarp or something. Sometimes
But-
they use a front end loader to mix up the
Mm-hmm.
compost because, you know, maybe they have horses or cattle or something like that. So as far as what you should compost, fruit and vegetable peelings. So anything you're eating, cauliflower, corn, whatever. Some people say not to put citrus in their compost pile. I
Mhm.
do it all the time, no problem with that. Coffee grounds, tea bags, cotton socks. If you lost a sock or it has a hole in it, it's a cotton sock, throw it in the compost pile. If you
Wow.
have junk mail or old bills or something you want to shred up and it's not slick paper, then shred
Mhm.
it and put it in the compost pile.
So not the glossy type wrapping
Right.
type paper, anything. Okay.
Right, not that.
Awesome.
But you want to make sure that you have 1/2 to 2/3 of your compost be brown, which means like cardboard, leaves, straw, think dead stuff, dry stuff. And then the other 1/3 to 1/2 can be green or stuff with more moisture. So like your fruit and vegetable peelings.
Mhm.
And then that mix, if you have that mix and don't put the stuff in there that I said not to put in there, your compost pile should not stink.
And
Nice.
how long is it going to take for a compost pile to be ready, to be
So
finished?
if you turned it every day,
Every
then
day?
it could potent every day, which is more likely if you have one of the tumbling things.
Okay.
And I almost never turn mine. But if you turned it every day, it could potentially be ready in 30 days.
Whoa.
Wow.
So if you don't turn it, it might take a year.
Okay.
Wow.
But turning it helps the stuff on the outside of the pile get into the middle so it can decompose too. And it also adds some air to the pile because usually what's helping the composting needs air. I don't know if you've ever put leaves in a garbage bag on purpose or accidentally and just left them there and you open them up and they smell really bad.
Mhm.
It's still decomposing, but it's anaerobic bacteria that's decomposing it.
Hmm.
So you want to add that air into your pile ideally to speed it up. And
You don't recommend like boxing it in at all, or just leave it in a pile like in the corner of the yard?
so you can do it either way. I have a recycle bin that I bought online like 20 years ago because you couldn't buy them locally. It's of recycled plastic. It's still in great shape. And I like it to just be enclosed because then I have less worry about appearances, pests, stuff like that. I do put hardware cloth on the ground first and put the pile on top or the box on top because years ago I had a rat get into my compost pile and it was made out of pallets at the time. And I don't want a rat in my pile. Well, I have a cat now, so I don't really worry about rats, but just as a precaution, that's what I do. If you're not putting things in that I told you not to put in, then again, it's less likely you to have rodents. But just to be sure I do that, you can take chicken wire or like the plastic deer fencing or something and just make a cylinder shaped bin and use that, or just pile it up without anything around it if you want.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So you and I just moved here from California to Utah, and I have I'll be honest with you. I had no idea what I was doing in California. And so I really have no idea what I'm doing here either. I probably I tried to grow a garden for the last 5 years in California. And I'll be honest, every year I got better. More things lived than died. We were able to eat more things than we did every year as we continue to go. So I feel like I got better at it. But now that I'm here in Utah, and we have listeners in California, Washington, we have listeners all over the country, and actually we have several even in Canada. Where would I go to learn what I can plant? For example, you said we could have been planting in March. Well, what would I have planted in my zone, in my area? What do I need to? Where can I go for resources for those types of things to be able to learn what to plant when and what's good to plant in my area?
Well, locally, you can come to me, but other places, it's hard to say. You can try your local extension service. So each county in the US has an extension service that is connected with the land grant university in that state. And there's extension services that you can just go to and get information. They'll have information like when your last average frost date is. So when to plant different things. Sometimes they have lists of varieties of, they've maybe tested different varieties of corn or tomatoes or something and say, these are some that do well here. That's not to say there's some that do well that they aren't on their list, but that can give you some ideas. They can also help with pest identification, tell you what kind of pests might be in the area and what to do about it. Sometimes they don't list the organic information. I only garden organically, so that's what I help people do. And I think there's lots of reasons to do that. For one thing, now a lot of farmers are having difficulty getting synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. So if for no other reason, that's a good reason to switch to organic. So just keep in mind, they may not have those organic options, but at least if you can find out what a pest is or something, find out other ways to take care of it if they don't have the organic options. So I'd go to the extension service first and see what they have. See if there's somebody that's a garden coach, which is what I am in that area. Those are resources to go to. You can certainly go to gardeninspire.com, which is my garden coaching website. I do have some information on there, like there's an article about what to do about slugs and snails, for example. There's another one about weeds. There's another one about deer, different ideas that may help with deer. So you're welcome to go there and see what you can find.
Awesome. So do I just go to Google and type in extension services in my local area or something like that, and it'll search up?
Yeah, and actually on gardeninspire.com under resources, I have a link to extension services. So it has like a map of the country and you can find out where yours is.
Cool. We'll put that link in the description too, so
Okay.
that people can access that. That's excellent.
Another cool resource, guys, is, if you go back to our archives, go to episode 18, 50, and 51. Buena is in all of those. And we cover a lot of the same things, but in different ways. And so there's going to be a lot of questions answered. So if you're like, I can't wait till next week, I need to know this stuff now, you'll get a lot of it now in those episodes. So 18, 50, and 51. But also download this and play it on repeat, and contact Buena, gardeninspire.com. Check out our Facebook pages. Contact through social media is easy.
And if you're here locally, come on in to Basil and Rose.
It's a cute store. Like I keep saying, I'm going to bring my daughter, and every time I come while she's at school. I'm like, I got her to get stuff. I'm in a rush. I need this. Like just the other day, I'm like, I need all the vermiculite. No, I said, I need all I called it something else.
Perlite, maybe?
I think I said perlite.
Which is like, something different.
She's like, you mean vermiculite? And I'm all, I guess. I'm like, I'm a garden dummy. So like everyone that's listening, like wherever you are, start. Listen to Buena, find local gardening experts that can help you. What's the biggest mistake most gardeners make when they first start?
Maybe doing too much is one thing. So, start with a few things and go from there, and planting at the wrong times, like thinking they have to wait to plant is a big one. And then watering.
Oh,
yes.
I have a question.
Oh, that's you?
I have a question.
Watering. Like, do I need to water every day, every other day, or different things needing more water?
So things need different water, depending on what it is. So most things do not need watered every day.
Okay.
And if it's brand new seeds, the soil needs to stay damp, which doesn't necessarily mean every day. Just depends on the weather, time of year, all of that. And in the middle of summer here in northern Utah, I usually water my garden every other day.
Okay.
I didn't change anything about that last year when it was super hot. I watered exactly the same and things were just fine. But people tend to overwater. They say more plants are killed by overwatering than underwatering. If something's in a container, pot, raised bed, or whatever, stick your finger into the soil and see how damp it actually is or dry it actually is, because on top it can look drier or wetter than it actually is.
I killed my plants last year. I overwatered like crazy. I had like 6 tomato bushes, and I I finally stuck my finger in the soil and I was like, it's just a marsh. It was a marsh down there. I'm like,
So
yeah,
Buena,
so
quick
don't water too
question.
much.
I guess call this my last question is, we all like to see a little bit of success right up front. What is the easiest crop that I can grow that our family can eat, that we can enjoy, that's going to be, hey, I can do this, and then give me the inspiration to try more things? What's the easiest food crop to grow?
Well, first of all, it needs to be something your family would eat.
Right.
So lettuce is really easy.
Okay.
Peas are pretty easy. Those are things you can plant starting in March. If you wait too late and it's hot, they're not going to do so well. And another thing that reminds me that a lot of people make mistakes about is planting the seeds too deeply. So how deep you plant the seeds depends on the size of seeds. So lettuce is really tiny, so you just barely cover it with soil, where peas are bigger, so you plant them more deeply. So 2 to 3 times deeper than the size of the seed.
And would you recommend that I sprout those indoors first?
Not for those.
No.
I just plant them directly in the garden.
Okay.
Yeah, what should I be planting indoors? Like starting.
So starting indoors, tomatoes and peppers, which is a little late for those this year. But those are things you can start your own seeds inside. There's some you can go either way, like cabbage, broccoli, all those. You can plant the seeds directly in the ground or start them ahead. Some people plant squashes and melons and cucumbers directly in the ground from seed, and some people start them ahead. But you only want to start them about 2 weeks ahead for those, because squashes and melons and things get big pretty fast. Now you could soak the peas overnight and let them sprout just a little bit and then plant them, but don't like grow them into a plant and then plant them in the ground outside.
I've also
So
heard
let's say that I grow. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've also heard it's good, like at the end of the season, like when you're collecting your food, like if at all possible, save the seeds because they've learned from that soil and then they're better for that ground again the next year. Or is that just a myth?
Well, I don't know, but it is really important to learn to save seeds from your plants, because what if you couldn't get seeds? And the only seeds I sell are heirloom or open pollinated, which means you can save seeds from those things for the future. And the way you save seeds from different things is not always the same. And so saving seeds from a tomato is not the same as saving seeds from radishes, for example. And then some things, I just let them reseed themselves. I've done that with kale. So instead of collecting the seeds, I just let it flower, go to seed, and replant itself. So that's another thing you can do.
So is that more of like your edible landscape type stuff?
It can be.
Okay. What would you recommend for like the edible landscape? Like, is it stuff you want that's just going to grow every year, or like, do you have to like, I'm a dummy on edible landscape. So let's kind of give
Perennials or annuals.
Yeah.
So it can be all that kind of thing. Some people put raised beds in their front yard. I don't do that because, for one thing, I'm advertising to everybody that I have food in my front yard. And I would rather do kind of stealth gardening where it looks like ornamentals maybe, but it's not. So currants are an attractive shrub. So are gooseberries. I have them growing in my front yard. I have 8 or 9 different kinds of currants, and why not do stuff like that? So
what's a currant for?
It's a fruit that you can eat raw, or you can make it into jam or juice.
Currant?
And most of the ones I have taste good raw.
Nice.
And one of the earliest fruits to produce in this area. On gardeninspire.com again, if you put in edible landscaping, there's a list of plants that you can grow in your yard in zone 6. And then there's also a list of things that you could grow as houseplants. All my houseplants are edible.
Nice.
That's awesome. So you always have clean air and something to eat.
Yes. If you're going to have houseplants, why not have them be something you can eat? Now, edible does not necessarily always mean tasty. So some things maybe I would only eat if I needed something more to eat. But having a variety of plants in your yard that you can eat is great, because what if you lost a crop of your cherries or apples or something else, and you have other fruits producing that you could eat. So there was one year I didn't get my early garden planted, my lettuce and all that stuff, just some things came up and I didn't, but I was still able to go out in my yard and gather all this stuff to make a salad. In fact, I just posted on Facebook the other day, I made my salad from my yard with stuff that I had not planted this year, even though I
Including-
did plant this year.
Including dandelions, right?
There were some dandelion greens in there, miner's lettuce, which is another wild edible plant. There was some kale that had reseeded, just some small leaves of that. There was garlic chives, so a perennial herb. There was lemon balm, another perennial herb. There was sorrel, perennial vegetable herb. Anyway, all these different things were in that salad, so it was a nice mix of greens that none of it was planted this year.
That's
Do
awesome.
do you do anything special to keep the nutrients for those going? Do you like spray them or put stuff around them throughout the year to keep them going?
So compost is great in all parts of your yard. And I usually don't make enough to fulfill my needs.
Mhm.
So when you buy compost, you want to make sure to know what's actually in it to make sure it's really compost. And if it's called biosolids or made with biosolids, it's composted human waste. I don't use that. I don't recommend it. Partly because of all the drugs, Drano, all that stuff in it. So make sure if you're buying compost, you know what's actually in it. But anyway, compost is great for the soil, especially here in Utah where there's not much organic matter. And then I also use a fish emulsion liquid seaweed mix, and it comes in a concentrate. You can just put it in a hose and sprayer and spray everything. It absorbs it through the leaves. You can water with it. And I haven't done this yet, but you can actually make something instead of the fish emulsion seaweed. And if you have seaweed in your area, that's great. You can use that seaweed. You just want to make sure you rinse the salt off of it from the ocean.
Okay.
But where you're not near the ocean like me, you can mix comfrey, alfalfa, stinging nettle, any of those together and steep them for, I don't remember how long. There's recipes online. I haven't actually done it yet, but it gets kind of stinky, but that has lots of nutrients. Comfrey and alfalfa bring nutrients up deep out of the soil. So they're great things to use as a compost. Some people grow comfrey under fruit trees and chop it down just to help feed the tree.
Wow.
That's great. So you kind of answered the question that I wanted to ask, but let me just make sure. If I was going to take a plant from inside the house or a little, thing that I made to just get it started, a starter kit or whatever, and I go and take that into the yard and put it in the ground, I want to probably dig a little bit bigger hole and then fill a bunch of compost and then put the plant in so that it has that extra compost there. Would that be true?
So what I do instead is I put compost down. Then when I dig the hole to plant, some of it's going to get mixed in with the hole.
Okay.
But I don't dig the hole and intentionally mix the compost, and it just happens because I put the compost down first.
Got it. Cool.
Now what about putting, say, manure directly onto your garden?
So
I got a lot of horse manure out here.
So it depends on the manure. If it's recently out of the animal, no, you want to compost it first.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbit can go right in the garden. There's not a problem with rabbit. I've cleaned out people's chicken pens before and put it on my lawn. And some of it was probably not composted as much as it should have been, but there was no problem other than the neighbor's dog rolling in it. But he rolled in the deer poop in the woods anyway. But so one problem with horse is weed seeds go right through a horse.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely compost horse manure really well, and hopefully it gets hot enough to kill weed seeds so you're not spreading them.
Cool.
But compost can be manures. It can be just stuff you made that doesn't have any animal products in it. There's lots of, it's just decomposed organic matter.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually just collected a whole bunch of leaves on the side of my house, the north side, and I've moved those into a compost pile. And I'm super stoked because I'm like, all right, I'm composting. And so to learn today what I need to be doing right, because a lot of stuff I do is wrong. This is exciting. I can't wait to listen to this again and take good notes again. Buena, thank you for being with us, taking time out of your schedule. I know you're off to a class or meeting after this. Guys, she has courses that she does all over the area here. So if you're local, you're very blessed. Come to her store, come learn from her, check out gardeninspire.com. And if you're in Bountiful, shoot on over to Basil and Rose. It's over on Orchard. What's the address here?
2110 Orchard Drive.
2110 Orchard Drive, guys. Thank you again for being here. You guys, you've been listening to Prepper Talk Radio. We are radio for the ready-minded. Have a blessed day, a happy day, and God bless you.